Hey everybody, Dave here, and welcome back to yet another video. You know, as the title suggests, today we're going to be talking about how to select hunting arrows for your crossbow. I've done a lot of research, and recently I've purchased a CenterPoint Amped 415 crossbow, and so today I want to go over with you the ideas I came up with for selecting the arrow for that particular bow and what might be helpful to you as well. So don't go anywhere. Okay, before we think about selecting what type of arrow we want to fire out of our crossbow, I think it's important that we determine a couple of things. First off is what you're hunting. If you're hunting bear or heavier game like that, elk, I personally like to go with a heavier arrow. If you are just hunting white-tailed deer or smaller game, then you know the arrows that come from the factory may fit your needs perfectly. This arrow here is a CenterPoint arrow, and it weighs in at 300 grains. That's without a tip, and just as it comes from the factory. The arrow that I am going to be moving up to is a pile driver, and this arrow weighs in at 367 grains. And so it's 67 grains heavier, and I've also added a lighted nock to this because I want the advantages of a lighted nock. The ones from the factory come with a plain nock like this. So a couple of things we got to understand about an arrow and how it works before we even picture adding weight to the front is that arrow setting in a crossbow or on the shelf of your bow is at rest, and you know anything that's at rest wants to stay at rest. So when you're adding energy to it, things are going to happen to that arrow that don't normally happen. For instance, you've got all this energy backed up in the limbs of your crossbow. As soon as you pull that trigger, that energy, that string slams forward into this arrow. And that arrow is going to want to flex like this because the front end hasn't caught up to the energy that the back end has. And so it wants to flex until it moves forward, and then it begins to straighten out. Now as that arrow moves downfield, it's doing this, okay, ever so slightly, until finally it straightens out. And one of the main things that straightens out that arrow is the fletchings. But not just the fletchings, also the weight on the forward end of the arrow plays a great part in this as well. Let me explain to you what I'm talking about. If I balance this arrow on my hand like this, okay, you can see that the weight is actually back here right about center, okay? So if I use my finger as a fulcrum and I bring that all the way back here to the fletchings, and I would put a weight on this end. To try and move that weight up, I would push down on this end, but it would be very hard because I don't have very much leverage there. But if I move my finger all the way up here and had a great amount of weight on here, I could move this very easily. And so by adding weight to the forward portion of the arrow, that automatically moves this fulcrum forward as well, it gives the vanes a lot more leverage to correct itself more quickly. So a lot of guys think that adding weight to the front of the arrow will decrease accuracy, and in reality, it can very well work the opposite. But there are other factors you're giving up, like reduced speed and also no longer have a flatter trajectory that you did with a faster, lighter arrow. So this will dive sooner. But you know, a couple of things I just want to talk about, and that is that I think moving through the archery phases, you know, we started with traditional archery and you know recurve and long bows, and moved up to compound bows, and our yardage increased with that, and now we're using crossbows. And you know, for so many of us, I think we kind of substitute crossbows now for a rifle, and we've lost that ability to enhance our experience by making sure we don't lose our woodsmanship. You know, when I shoot a deer or any animal with a piece of archery equipment, I take great pride in that because I've gotten close to it. And you know, shooting a deer that's maybe 50 yards, 60 yards down range, we have to be very careful with that. Last year, using my recurve crossbow, which is a 175-pound pole, but it only shoots around 200 feet per second. And I had a doe come in at 17 yards. It stood broadside, and it was in my ground blind, but it was a little skittish. And when I took that shot, from the time it took that arrow to leave the crossbow to reach that animal, it had turned 90 degrees, and I caught it straight here and broke the spine. So that tells me that the reaction time of these deer will be magnified downrange. You know, that was only at 17 yards, and granted it was with a bow that shoots about 200 feet per second. But even if you're shooting a bow that's 400 feet per second, when you move farther down range, I think we have to be careful about making sure we take ethical shots, making sure that animal isn't alerted, making sure we are on target consistently before we release that arrow. So just some things to think about. Don't trade your woodsmanship for technology, because technology will vary, but your woodsmanship will always be with you. Now, most arrows you can easily use for whitetail without an issue. You can use them right out of the crossbow, but there's a couple of reasons why I want to increase the weight. I want to increase the forward of center position, and I want these arrows to be more heavy duty, and that is because I want them to be able to have greater penetration on larger animals, all right, and I want them to perform in such a way that they're more durable, okay? The other thing it's going to do is it's going to save, I believe, it's going to save my crossbow limbs. When you look at the speed that crossbows are being manufactured to perform at right now, 400 plus feet per second, I mean, that's incredible. And a light arrow that's maybe only 300 grains, which this is 300 grains, and you're going to add a 100 grain broadhead on the end. Now you've got a 400 grain arrow, and you're shooting that at 415 feet per second. That's, to me, in my mind, pretty close to dry firing something. You know, and I believe because there's so many issues with broken crossbow limbs, I think it's because the limbs are reacting so quickly because there's no weight to hold back that string to allow them to operate within a range that's safer for them so that they last a whole lot longer. In other words, these limbs are just firing as if there's nothing in them because these arrows are so light. By increasing the weight of the arrow overall, I think it's going to really help me save my limbs as well. And none of us wants to get out in the field and, you know, get into a situation where we hang up our crossbow. And guys I've read this in the forums where they're just sitting there in their tree stand and all of a sudden their limbs just crack. And I believe that's because of the constant use with a high velocity because of a low arrow speed. So just my thoughts on that. So one of the things I'm going to do is my arrows are going to be built heavier, and I'm going to have a greater forward of center on them as well. So the arrow I've selected for my crossbow is this pile driver right here. It's a 20-inch bolt or arrow, however you want to say it. And what I've done, the first thing I've done is I've added lighted nocks to the end of this. This lighted nock is 25 grains, where the nocks that come with the arrows, like this, are only about 13 grains. So the very first thing you want to do when you're setting up an arrow to tune it to fire from your bow is make sure that if you're changing the nocks, do it now. Don't do it after you've got everything tuned up, because this adds to the weight, changes the forward to center, and it's something you want to do ahead of time, not after the fact. Okay, this is a small scale I picked up. It's an elite scale. It's probably about $15 or so. But if you don't have one of these, they really are a great addition to your archery building needs. I mean, you can set up your arrows and determine things really properly with this. So let me just turn it on. And what I want to do is, I've already told you the weight of this arrow, but here's what I want to do. This is the pile driver arrow right here that I'm going to be using, and this says that it came 442 grains with a 100-point tip in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to weigh this without. And as I said, it's 367 grains, and that is with the lighted knock I put on the end. All right, so now what I want to do to this is I want to add, I have here 125 grain steel insert, or broadhead insert for, not the insert, but the adapter. And I'm going to put that on there as well. All right, if I can get it to stay. There you go. And now we're at 492 grains. And then these are the broadheads that I've selected. They're snuffer broadheads. They are really, I really like the 3:1 ratio. You know, they give a tremendous amount of penetration. They're brazed solidly on here. They're extremely strong, extremely sharp. And you know, because I'm specifically moving up to these type of broadheads for bear, I want something that's really going to be beefy, and if it hits bone or anything else, has a tendency to break through rather than it break. And so let's weigh this one as well, and that's going to get us pretty close to where we're at. So we're looking at 619 grains. Now you might think that's excessive, but I'm going to show you how all this plays together to give us an arrow that's going to be accurate and also going to have a tremendous amount of penetration. So what I want to do is I want to take this adapter and I want to screw it on the end of the broadhead, and I want to determine what the forward of center percentage is for this arrow. So I just screw this on lightly. Again, I'm not putting any glue on this, and the reason I use adapters rather than just use a screw-in broadhead. Now if I was using something mechanical like a Rage or a Swacker, I could just screw that in, not worry about it. But because I'm using a fixed 3-blade broadhead, I want to align that at the end with the vanes. This has 3 blades on it. The vanes have 3. I want each blade to align with a vane. And that way, when I do that, I'll have the most consistency between the arrows. If I have one where it lines up off blade, you know, the blades don't line up with the fletchings, and one that do, it could fly differently. I want to make sure that they all fly as close to the same as possible. So what I'm doing is I'm using adapters, and I'm gluing on my own heads. And then I can take the time to align them as I sight down them with the vanes and make sure that everything is lined up. And that way I'll have the most consistent arrow flight between arrows. So now what I want to do is I want to determine the forward of center portion of this arrow. And so what I did, I just put it on my finger like this, and I just move it back and forth until it balances. Right there. As you can see, right there is balanced. So now what I want to do is I want to put a mark right here at my finger. And now I'm going to take a tape measure, and I'm going to measure from that mark forward. And I'm not measuring to the point of the arrow. I'm only measuring to the end of the shaft insert. So I have 6 1/4 inches. All right. So now you may be figuring, what do I do with that dimension? Well, we know the shaft length is 20 inches. So we take half of that because that would be the center of the shaft, right? And now what we do is that would be 10 inches. Then we subtract that 6 1/4 from the 10 inches, all right? And we get 3 3/4, or 3.75. So now what we're going to do is take that 3.75, we can use a calculator if you want for this, and you divide that by 20, okay? And when I do that, I get about 18% forward of center, okay? Because we're only looking at that little bit right there. We're moving 18% of the whole arrow shaft length forward of center. 10 to 15 is what most people shoot at, but you can move up 18, 20, 25 even, and you know, not be affected the arrow. In fact, a lot of guys who shoot for tough game like a forward of center arrow. So That's not an unreasonable amount, and I think it's going to serve us just fine. Now, the other thing I've done is we want to be able to shoot this arrow to make sure that it flies correctly with that 18% forward to center, with that heavier weight on the end. You're looking with that insert on here, a 250 grain broadhead, all right, which is over double what most people shoot. But again, I'm looking for penetration. I'm looking for that added weight to drive through the animal. Now, you might be thinking, well, isn't that going to slow your bow down a lot? Well, here's the calculation that someone's come up with for that. For every 10 grains of weight that you add to an arrow, whether it's the fletchings or the broadhead or whatever, the total weight that you add to an arrow, you lose 3 feet per second. So my bow is 415 feet per second. And you know what? That's a factory determination. So let's take out some variable for that. Let's make it 410 feet per second. Okay? Because you know that was shot at optimal conditions. So I know that this arrow, okay, is 619, and this is the one that came from the factory. So let me start this calculator or scale up again. This is the tip that came from the factory. This is the arrow that came from the factory. So I'm looking at 400 grains, all right? So I know that I am 219 grains over, all right? So what I need to do is I divide that by 10, all right? So let's say 220, so that's 22. And then I multiply that times 3. So I'm losing 66 feet per second. Now you might think, wow, that's a lot, okay? Well, let's take it from the 410. So if I have 410 feet, okay, and I take away 66 feet, I'm still shooting at 344 feet per second. You got to remember, I've been taking deer with a recurve crossbow that only shoots about 200 feet per second. All right? So I'm actually gaining 140 feet per second. So there are a lot of arrows that came out, or a lot of crossbows that came out earlier that are only shooting 305, 340 feet per second with a 100 grain broadhead and a factory arrow. So I'm really not losing that much, and I'd rather have this heavier arrow with a heavier forward to center that I'm shooting out of my crossbow instead of a lighter arrow, because I think this is going to give me better penetration. Again, my shots aren't going to be past 30 yards. That's just my ethic. I don't like doing that, and at least those are my plans. And it's also, I believe, going to help save my limbs, because the limbs are going to have to react slower, and they're not going to be discharged as quickly. So I think that's really going to help prolong my crossbow. Now, the other thing you can do is I have here a field point test kit. And so one of the things you may want to do, if instead of going through all this, which will really give you more accurate and set up and let you know exactly what's going on, is you could use a field point test kit like this. And this ranges anywhere from, I think, like 125, 150, 175, all the way up, I think it's like 300 grains. So this will allow you to change the broadheads and see how your arrow reacts once you shoot it from your crossbow. But the way everything looks like this, I think I'm going to be good to go using this 250 grain broadhead with the insert in there, the adapter. And what I'm going to do is take it out and fire it now. It's tuned on a piece of paper so that this arrow is correcting itself, because if you add too much weight, you can move that forward to center too far forward, I believe. So but the 18%, I think that's good. I think we're going to be really on track with this. Again, if I would shoot this broadhead from the factory arrow, because the factory arrow is lighter. I don't think I'd have the accuracy as I would from the heavier arrow, because this isn't going to flex or bend as much as this one. And by adding more weight, again, that wants to stay at rest. You're adding more weight on the end, it's going to increase flex. So the weight of this arrow increases the stiffness, which allows me to shoot this heavier broadhead as well. So I'm going to take it outside and give it a few shots, and I'll let you know the results. Okay, just to make things a little more accurate, I'm going to put just a small piece of green tape here, about the size of a $50, and that's what we're going to be aiming at from 20 yards. Well, I'd say it's time to wrap things up. Hit the tape 3 out of 3, pretty close for me, and so I think we're good to go. So you may have noticed I moved back to the regular nocks as opposed to the lighted nocks. I like the lighted nocks better, but I was having problems with them. They were actually splitting the arrow back here. The shoulder wasn't quite big enough and it was going inside. So I switched back over to these regular ones, and I'm probably going to use a string tracker with this as well. I'm going to set that up, and I'll show you how to do that in another video. But anyway, that's where we are. I think we're good to go, guys. Hey everybody, thanks so much for taking the time to hang out with us today. We really appreciate it. Appreciate all the subscriptions, appreciate the thumbs up and the comments as well. They all mean a lot to help growing our channel, so thank you so much. Let me just leave you with this thought, and that is, as archery season gets closer, we spend a great deal of time in the selection of broadheads, arrows, equipment, in maintenance of our equipment, and a great deal of time at the range. And why do we do all that? Well, so that when the opportunity does present itself, we have the chance of harvesting a beautiful animal humanely and effectively. But it doesn't always go that way in the field, does it? Sometimes there's circumstances that change. Sometimes it's a mistake we've made that doesn't allow us to make the best shot on an animal. And when that happens, I just get sick about it. And you probably do too as well. And if we continue to dwell on that situation and that mistake, it can grow deeper and deeper, and it can not only affect how we hunt, but affect how we operate as well. That's not too unlike life. There are circumstances and situations that can overwhelm us. I remember about 20 years ago, I faced one of those situations. I didn't know how to handle it at the time. And so there was a great deal of hurt that I experienced in my life. And through that, I wound up in a deep, deep depression that lasted about 2 years. It caused my marriage to be on the rocks, and at one point just brought me to the point where I wanted to really just end my life. I just wanted it to be over. And it was at that time that God showed up, and he began to show me about his love and his goodness in a way I hadn't thought about before. And not only that, he revealed to me some steps that I could follow to get me out of that depression. Even though I'd gone to counseling and tried prescription medication through those counselors, nothing seemed to work. But what God showed me did. And so I've gone on to write a book. It's free. Doesn't require your email or anything else to capture. It's in the description below, and all you have to do is click on it and read it. But it's called Freedom from Depression in Less Than a Month. And then I share with you in great detail about my struggle, about the cause of it, about how God brought me through it, and how he can do that for you as well. I've been able to share those steps with many people, and they've found the same healing I have. You know, I really encourage you to check out the book if it's something you're going through, or maybe a friend's going through, because, you know, situations can break even the strongest person. I found that out for myself. So check out the book. Again, check out all my books. They're all free and down there waiting for you. All you have to do is click on them. You can begin reading. They're all there for you so that you might know the abundant life that can be found through a relationship with God. So again, please remember always, always, always that God loves you more than you could ever know. So until the next one, make sure you get outdoors, and God bless.